In a city bustling with life, there lived a man named Themba. Known for his charm and silver tongue, he was admired by many, but behind his respectable appearance was a man entangled in lies, deceit, and infidelity. He had a long-term girlfriend, Xandile, but his heart wandered, seeking thrills from countless affairs. Among his secret lovers was Nomsa, a striking beauty who fell deeply for Themba, despite knowing she was only one of many. One night, as the city lights flickered in the distance, a tragedy struck. Nomsa, the woman who had been hopelessly in love with Themba, died suddenly and mysteriously. The news sent shockwaves through the community. While her death was suspicious, no one dared to investigate too deeply. Nomsa's family was devastated, but for Themba, it was just another chapter in his double life, or so he thought. Days passed, and life went on, but Themba couldn't stop thinking about Nomsa. His mind was haunted by the way she had died so suddenly, leaving things unfinished between them. One evening, while out drinking with some friends, one of them let slip that Nomsa's body had been taken to the local mortuary. A sinister idea crept into Themba's mind, a twisted, dark thought he could not shake. Fueled by alcohol and the arrogance of someone who thought they could get away with anything, Themba hatched a plan. That night, while the city slept, he would sneak into the mortuary for one final, macabre encounter with Nomsa's lifeless body. It was a horrifying thought, but for some reason, it exhilarated him. He was a man who thrived on breaking rules and boundaries, and this would be his ultimate act of defiance. As the clock struck midnight, Themba made his way to the mortuary. The streets were deserted, the city quiet, save for the occasional dog barking in the distance. Themba approached the mortuary's back entrance, his heart pounding. His hands trembled as he used the spare key his friend, who worked there, had given him. The door creaked open, and he stepped inside. The air inside was cold, and the smell of chemicals hung heavy. His breath fogged in front of him as he navigated through the sterile hallways. He knew exactly where to go. It wasn't long before he reached the cold chamber where Nomsa's body was stored. He stopped for a moment, his heart thundering in his chest. Was he really going to do this? With shaking hands, he pulled open the door to the cold chamber and slid out the steel tray that held Nomsa's body. The sight of her lifeless form chilled him to the bone, but he pushed his fear aside. He slowly unzipped the body bag, revealing her face. Her once vibrant eyes were closed, her skin pale and cold, a stark contrast to the warmth and life she had once radiated. As Themba gazed down at her, a strange mixture of emotions washed over him. Guilt, lust, and a deep, unsettling sense of dread filled his mind. He whispered to her, almost as if hoping she could hear him, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to end like this." But there was no response, just the deafening silence of the morgue. Without warning, the temperature in the room dropped even further, and the lights flickered. Themba felt a chill run down his spine, but he ignored it, attributing it to his imagination. But then, as he leaned in closer to Nomsa's body, something horrifying happened. Her eyes, which had been closed in eternal slumber, suddenly snapped open. Frozen in terror, Themba stumbled backward. His mind raced, this was impossible. She was dead. But as he watched in horror, her cold, stiff hand reached out and grabbed his wrist with an unnatural force. Her grip was icy and strong, as if life had returned to her through some dark, vengeful magic. Panic surged through Themba as he tried to yank his arm free, but Nomsa's grip was unbreakable. Her mouth moved, and from it came a low, rasping voice, unlike anything he had ever heard. "You thought you could get away with this, Themba," she hissed. "You thought you could come back to me after death?" Themba's heart raced as he struggled to escape, but it was no use. Nomsa's dead eyes bore into his soul, and he felt an overwhelming sense of doom. The lights flickered violently, and then, as if responding to some unseen force, the other corpses in the room began to stir. Slowly, they started to rise from their slabs, their movements jerky and unnatural. The room filled with the sound of shuffling feet and rustling sheets. Themba's breath came in short, frantic gasps as he realized he was surrounded by the dead. There was no escape. As the corpses moved closer, he could feel the weight of his sins bearing down on him. The dead had risen, and they were coming for him. In his final moments, Themba let out a scream that echoed through the cold, sterile halls of the mortuary. But it was too late. Nomsa's icy grip tightened, pulling him down to the cold floor. The last thing he saw was her dead, empty eyes staring into his, as the room plunged into darkness. The next morning, when the mortuary workers arrived, they found Themba's lifeless body lying next to Nomsa's, his face contorted in a mask of sheer terror. His wide-open eyes stared at the ceiling, forever frozen in fear. No one could explain what had happened that night, but the story spread like wildfire through the town. From that day on, people whispered about Themba's fate. Some said it was a warning, a punishment from beyond the grave for his sinful ways. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to African Cradle for more powerful tales from African folklore.